Ladies and gentlemen, Liz Baré from the Centre for the Study of Higher Education at the University of Melbourne. She's written for years and years about the silent, understated majority in the higher education workforce, the people that Luke just referred to, who keep the boilers running, who look after the monkeys, and I don't mean the students, who do the professional staff who really do most of the work simply because they are most of the staff. I remember years ago she wrote a brilliant piece. It was deeply thought through and deeply procedural about the higher education workers classification system. And she was saying it was written in the 1990s. It's completely obsolete. We need to change it. Well, I was convinced, and I sat back and I waited for everybody to say, Joe, that's a good idea, let's get onto this. And not a sausage. Nothing changed then and nothing has changed now. Fortunately, Liz is still is a partisan and very, very, very professional and consistent woman, very precise, and she keeps going. She's still making the classic case for productivity in higher education, that for professional staff to be empowered, they need to be able to work smarter rather than harder. Liz Baré, explain it all to us.
Well, thank you very much, and after that last speech I feel totally intimidated. But one thing I would say, because while in the last 9 or 14 years or so I haven't worked in Australian universities, I've worked in universities in the second and the third world. And no matter how bad it is here, let me tell you, we are better off than there. But I also see some great innovation. So, my purpose today is to talk a bit about professional staff and basically to make my case. Now, I know many professional staff, great and good colleagues, very able people, keep universities running, understand the complexity. But that we do not have enough of those people. And so what I'm going to be talking about today is, in a way, how do we get there and how do we get those numbers of people who can really support the incredible changes that are facing higher ed. So here we are. One thing that nobody knows, I think, is you don't need any qualifications to work in higher education. Absolutely none. The ones that are highlighted in yellow are those job categories that you can walk in without any qualifications. I've highlighted blue because bank employees do actually have to complete Year 12, but they also have graduate recruitment programs. So banks value the value of university educations. We in universities do not put out a marker that we're valuing our own product. And that has always amazed me, why this is the case. Is it reflecting internal values in institutions, or perhaps it's always worked that way, so that's the way it's always been, so why change it? If it's broke, don't change it. A very common commentary put to me by many people. So let's look at the numbers. You see these numbers all the time. The blue poles are academic staff, the green poles are professional staff. Broadly, they've been moving in sequence in line with the increases in the number of students. But one of the questions I want to ask is, why do we ever even think that these ratios are really important? When I started working at Melbourne University, we were aiming to be 50-50. We were going to have 50% academic staff and 50% professional staff. And that seemed to be the goal for years and years and years. But really, it doesn't matter what the ratio is, or what is more important is, what is the actual workforce that we need to get the job done in a professional manner that meets the objectives of the institutions. Now, people don't really know why professional staff numbers are increasing, or increase or change. I noticed with a wry smile, and I don't think Luke's here anymore, that Universities Australia thought, oh, well, it might be there's more educational designers. And there is no doubt, when you look at it, the increased regulatory complexity is enormous. I do all my work on publicly available data, so I read lots and lots of university annual reports. And I can tell you, you just read page after page after page of reporting on regulations. The other issue is that I don't think universities have been very good at harvesting the benefits of their changes. So we've seen year after year after year, you see, oh, we're going to have a restructure, we're going to be more efficient, and we're going to target 100, 150 professional staff and 50 academic staff, something like that. But the work that Janet Beard and I did, my colleague Janet Beard's here, a few years ago, demonstrated that as soon as universities cut staff numbers, casual numbers went up. As soon as the numbers returned to the status quo ante, casual numbers went down. So universities do not necessarily seem to have a very good track record of maintaining staffing levels and numbers. And that's probably because the whole approach to staffing is decentralised, especially in recruitment. The workforce itself is predominantly female, between the ages of 35 and 55. As best I can gather, there is 10% more bodies than there are FTEs, so that means it's not that 10% work part-time, but probably a fairly high percentage of professional staff work part-time. Based on those very nice universities that do publish the level and gender breakdown of their staff in their annual reports, it appears that the majority of more senior roles are filled by male staff members. And the other thing that I was quite shocked to read, and I'm sure many of you are, and I'd be interested in your perceptions of what this means, is this psychosocial report that's just come out, which shows high levels of anxiety and concerns about workloads and security in universities. And for me, that's a massive challenge. And how is this to be dealt with? So I'd be very interested in comments that people have on that. If we look at research on professional staff, there's very little. My colleague over here, Will Crouch, has done quite a bit, as has Peter Wallet. And there was a survey done by Carol Graham in 2017, and an English collaborator, looking at why people worked in universities, and the most common reason was that they fell into it by chance. That is my story too. I fell in it by chance, thought I'd stay 2 years, look what I'm doing now. So that is very much. And then if you look at the other survey, which was done in about 2010, of staff motivation for working in universities, and a big demographic survey, and there were 6,000 professional staff interviewed. It was very interesting. Again, a very high percentage had a bachelor or a higher degree, but they seemed to be fairly happy insofar as there was a question, where do you think you will be in the next 5 years? 50 or 60% said in the same job. So that looked like people had come in and were relatively content doing what they were doing. And there wasn't necessarily a lot of aspiration, especially amongst the females, but the males had far higher aspirations about advancement. Everybody in this room knows the breadth of what people do, professional staff do. And that's just the very simple list. Everything from incredibly supporting students through libraries, IT, to supporting teaching and learning through learning skills advisors and educational technologists, to managing research grants, to writing research grants, tarting up research grant applications when they need to be looking a bit more professional, all those sorts of things. And then, of course, there's another bundle of people who work on students, and then there's the general administration, including human resources, finance, and buildings. The majority of professional, I've gone too far. I did that. The majority of professional staff actually work in the central administration units, but a fairly sizable proportion, that is the bottom line, work in academic organisational units. And you can see that that number of professional staff working in academic organisational units is declining and moving back to the centre, which shows to me that, at least generally, universities might be re-centralising what they do. What is definitely true is that the professional staff work has become more complex and more expensive, and the lower levels have almost disappeared. So if this was 2002 and the number of 10s and aboves, here we are in 2025 with nearly 18% of the staff, professional staff, being at level 10 and above. Now, this is from one university's annual report, and it is an inner city university, and it may be that some of these levels are overstated because they're competing against high salaries in a big city. But nonetheless, you can see that the weight of the work has changed, that the lower level jobs are disappearing, and the work is becoming more complex, more demanding. I do wish we had that data nationally, but we really have to just search various annual reports to get that data. Now, these levels are determined by the 10-level structure, and that structure was introduced as part of a wider industrial relations reforms in the early 90s. But in fact, the reality is that the first 5 levels were developed at the University of Melbourne in 1989, because I know, because I was there. And they really reflected a world of work that is almost past. That was a time when many people working in higher education administration did not have degrees, when many of universities ran their own cleaning, own maintenance, gardening, all those sort of other support services. Those have changed, and we've now got this situation where we've got a system that is skewed to about the top 6 or 7 levels. The aim behind the 10-level structure, and we had great visions. Let's say we were really brave then, we were, Luke, and we really believed that what we were doing was to create this one big structure, and people with ambition could work their way across the structure and rise so that they would have broad experience, get qualifications, and become university leaders in professional staff. I think that it has worked well, in the sense that it has accommodated pretty well every new type of job that's come up. So we've got instructional designers, etc., etc. They easily accommodated, or partly easily accommodated there. But it is now out of date, and we do need professional staff who have this breadth of experience, and that structure of itself has not delivered it. Now, the public data that I look at doesn't tell us lots of things. I mean, I don't know how much all these scandals about overpayment, vice-chancellors' salaries, etc., and redundancies have impacted on recruitment. I don't know, and nobody, only institutions know, how much staff are seeing themselves having a career in higher education and moving upwards, or see themselves going up in a narrow profile. We don't know the extent of and the number of graduate entry schemes, but I don't think there are very many. But we don't see universities advertising, hey, come and work for us. This is really exciting. We are serving the nation. We have lots of really good things you can do. Come and work in the university as a graduate and put back. Do we see that? I'm not so sure. And we certainly do know, but I can't, because I've seen the data, but I haven't, that there's a very high turnover at that entry level for graduates at Q5. So we are not necessarily creating an environment where we can develop our professional staff and grow. Well, one of the things I've been looking at and really fascinates me is why in the world did those underpayments occur? Why did they occur? It's lots and lots of things. Obviously complexity of awards, obviously a great pressure on people to save money sometimes, but there are two other reasons which I think add to it. One is, I think that the enterprise agreements, which are so complex, you can't believe it, were agreed to by people who did not know how the work was done down in the coalface. So you have systems that you can't administer. And the second thing is that a lot of that entry work and that work is done by the people at Q5 level, those people who keep turning over because they are leaving. So you're not getting a cohort of staff who do know. The second thing I very quickly talk about is consultancies. It's always amazed me why universities use so much consultants. I love the New South Wales Legislative Council. Nobody else does, but I do, because they have lots and lots of inquiries. And this was one that they had into Wollongong and UTS, and they came up with this $64 million cost of consultancies. However, what I liked even better was that the KPMG lady defending it said, yeah, but all our people have worked, or at least 4 or 5 people on this team have worked in universities. So they've got the people from the universities, the people that universities themselves probably could have used to do this. And that consultancy spend, which I think is an exaggeration, is still an issue. In Victoria, and these are really ropey figures because I have to guess them, but there's a lot of spending on strategy and management as well as on building, and that's over a 5-year period. So, but I wouldn't, and also I would say that the spend for Victorian universities in 2025 is more likely to be about 40 million. So it's not nearly as great. So universities are backing off. So, I'll come back. I think Luke has outlined the challenges of the future, and so I'm not going to really run onto those, but I'm going to say I recommend to consider 5 things. First of all, we have to know more about our professional staff. We have to collect that data, not just institutionally, but nationally, so we actually know what we're really talking about, and they're not just also-rans. Secondly, we have to revise the 10-level structure. Minimum, we should create a career structure for expertise, be that highest quality IT people or educational designers, which is outside the broader structure. And that career structure should be based like a quasi-academic structure, based on a knowledge, skill, capacity. So it's based on performance and excellence in the job rather than work value, which is what we normally use. I think we need to have a graduate career program. I think universities should be out there recruiting their own and affirming that they value their own. And I know there's been attempts, and there have been some at some universities. There was a cross-university attempt in the UK, which was fantastic. I taught into it. I tell you what, I was so scared of those graduates that they recruited. But it failed because it was so expensive. We should look at developing career pathways that foster people moving around, that we place reward and incentive on people moving from faculty to centre, from centre to faculty to department. So we've got people who know at the middle and senior levels of the university who actually know how the whole university, or have got a vague idea of how the whole university works, rather than being expert in their area. And last but not least, we should look at some form of formal qualifications in higher education management. Now, I say we had them in the past, we don't have them anymore. Or in the UK, the equivalent of ATEM, the Association of Higher Education Managers, sponsors a program with the University of Nottingham. You can see postgraduate certificate, postgraduate diploma, masters. And I think that that's some of the things that we should do as well. So, as Stephen says, this is my swan song. I don't think I'll ever do this again, but I would like to hear what you think. Is this cloud cuckoo land? Could it be done? And if so, how could it be done? Thank you.
Questions? You've stunned them into silence. Yeah. Lady up the right at the end, Tim.
Well, I agree with that. I believe that the 10-level structure is outdated. Even if we look at, say, public services, they usually have a 5-level structure, of which in universities we'd probably only need 3. So that gives you a lot more flexibility about reward in the structure. The other problem I have with the 10-level structure is that people write job ads so they meet the classification requirements and not so that they meet the requirements of the job. And so you can say, oh, come and do all these wonderful things. And then when you get in there, oh, hey, listen, all I'm doing is punching data into a machine because this is what I do 90% of my time. So people feel that they need a level to get a person, so that a salary to get the person. Then often the jobs don't necessarily match what's in the job description and why they're recruited.
Lady right up the back.
Hi, Emil.
How do we dismantle the 10-level architecture, which has been in place for such a long time?
How did we get there? Let's start on how. Thanks, Emil. How did we get there? Well, first of all, we got there because of federal government and the ACTU. That was a major change where the federal government wanted to change the awards to remove all those little things which have crept back into our enterprise agreements, like if you do something extra, like you lift up a hammer 7 times, if you lift it up the 8th time, you get a special loading. So what they were trying to do was to eliminate it. And what has crept back, as I see the enterprise agreements, is all these if this, if that, etc., etc. So there's a lot more, and you know, they're there for good reasons, for protection, but they're also add to complexity. So how we got there was that the HR directors decided to get together and say, listen, we think we can do something better. And we came forward with an 8-level proposal. and then the universities and employed a consultancy group to go and look at right across the work across all the universities, and it was very contentious, but it came up with 10 levels, and I honestly can't remember why it was 10, but that's how it was. I think you'd almost have to go back to a root and branch sort of thing. Let's look at professional staff work in universities, let's look at how it's grouped, and then let's look as, does the current structure suit that, or do we need to change the current structure, and if so, how? It is a massive job. It is not a simple job. You can't just walk in and put 2 levels together and knock off one. I don't think you can do that. It has to be a root and branch job. But you've got to remember that this is now 30 years ago, 30-something, 1990. So if you have got it done by 2030, that'll be it'll be first change in 40 years, which is not much to ask.
Yeah, you're now about to go into round 10 of enterprise bargaining.
You'll never do it through enterprise bargaining because no institution has the courage to do it alone.
And on that point, I remember there's a famous case quite a while ago now at the University of Newcastle where there was a dispute over something, and they were in the commission where the commissioner duly discovered after a couple of weeks that neither side could agree what a particular clause in the bargain actually meant. And it just went from there. I think the commissioner in the end intervened and just told them what it meant. But listen, that ties to me a core question. Every time a university restructures, particularly for professional staff, for all the rhetoric, it is about cutting. It is not about encouraging or growing, it is about cutting. In a world where money still essentially is dependent on the Commonwealth and students, where universities don't have a culture other than internationals of growing, are they always going to fall back to trying to save rather than grow in terms of the productivity?
Well, this probably dates me very, very, very much, but I'm wondering why universities are not running stronger establishment controls. How, not that governments do it very well, but how governments do it is that they limit the number of positions across each agency at each level. If you started to actually run very tight establishment controls and have very tight approval for each job being advertised, you may be able to reduce that. But the second point I'd make, if you had more multi-skilled people, then why couldn't somebody from students, for example, work in HR? I don't see any reason. The purpose is, they're used to dealing with people, systems, processes. So are people in HR, people, systems, processes. So why aren't these skills just interchangeable? Why can't you move people? Universities seem to get very segmented in that, she's a student specialist, couldn't work in HR. Doesn't have an HR degree. Well, so, etc. So I think that if you had more people with broader experience, you'd be able to redeploy and hence perhaps keep better control over your numbers.
Do any universities stand out for the creativity of the way they run their administrations?
Well, I'd have to ask that group because I can only think. I think there's some very good HR departments. That's all I could say.
Professor Croucher.
Yeah, thanks. Will Croucher here. Liz, you made reference before to professional staff casualisation, right, as part of a response to COVID and the job cuts there. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that sort of trajectory, because clearly thinking about where casual staff would sit within the institution and within professional staff cohorts would be a key part of that story about thinking about redoing the 10 levels.
Okay, well, we do know that in 2023, professional staff casuals, casual professional staff, not professional staff, casual professional staff were about 10% of the professional staff workforce, and of those casual professional staff, about 50% were employed in academic organisational units, and the rest were employed centrally. What we have seen, and we haven't got the latest data, so we can't see it, but in 2023, it looked like those numbers were trending downwards. That at least in the central units, the number of casuals was definitely declining. That's probably because they would exercise tighter control over expenditure and funds. I don't know, but that's all I could say. But it was 10%. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. That was very interesting information that you provided. My name's Jane. I'm from UNSW. My question is around the connection that I think you're trying to draw to consulting spend.
Yeah.
In any of your analysis, have you seen that what the consulting spend is on is actually connected, or is the same as what the professional staff are actually doing, or are they doing different work with a different capability?
This is really hard because the areas that we get the data from are in Victorian universities. Early on, when they had to report, they very nicely said, do a review of X or Y or Z. And then they had the name of the consultant and they had the money. Unfortunately now, they do things like strategic services. However, I would say, based on that earlier analysis, that there are definitely things that professional staff could do. Write an implementation plan for X, for example. Review end-on-end processes for Y. So there are certainly things that I would expect that a competent professional staff member could do. But as universities are getting better and better first of all, they're reducing the rates, at least in Victoria, but also they're getting better and better and telling you less and less. It is quite hard to make those judgments. And sometimes you're reduced to thinking, and then you look up the name of the consultant. Oh, well, yes, okay. Well, that's about investment. That's probably not something that professional staff would do. But it's very much guesswork, to be honest. Yeah. But you're right, there is things that professional staff can do.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Melissa from University of Melbourne. I was quite interested in your comments about a quasi-academic model for some professional staff, and I wondered what you thought about how it might apply to people who don't comfortably fit in a professional or an academic space. Enterprise agreements don't really cater for such people, and it's very complex to work out where do they go and how do they fit into the career structures when they're not one or the other. Is that sort of how you saw your quasi-academic model?
Yes,
applying?
yes, thank you. Yes, I do. There's been quite a lot of... one of the few things that is being written about in professional staff is about these people, what we call the third space, which are and there is even a debate going on, even within this country, about whether or not we should have a separate classification for them, which was my and Janet Beard and a few other friends' proposals, or whether we should incorporate them in the 10-level proposal, 10-level structure. But if you look overseas, if you look at America, it's interesting that librarians are counted as academic staff, sort of. But they are counted as part of the academic staff in a way that are not here, and their salaries are sort of tied to those structures. And I think there is merit. I think it's really, let's just take an educational designer. That person's absolutely crucial to our education, delivery of education. we don't really have many ways of rewarding them as their expertise grows. They may also write stuff and may publish stuff. They may also give talks, etc., but they're not a typical academic. So my view is that we need, that's a separate structure, either within the existing TED Neville structure or outside it, to cater for people like them, but also these whiz-bang people who work in IT and do statistics and data analysis and those sorts of people. They're never going to be managers. They might be mentors, but we really need those people to have the opportunity to grow, because we're very dependent on those people in universities. So
there was an attempt a couple of years ago to create effectively a new industrial award for NCRIS managers, because they're doing all these amazingly complicated things and they're jamming them into an HEW structure, and that didn't make any sense.
Yeah. So well, that's another reason for actually changing the HEW structure or creating streams within it that makes sense to people.
Do we need a national structure? A national IR structure?
Probably. I wouldn't be so radical as to say that. Remember, Victoria's ceded its IR powers, as have many states, to the Commonwealth. I think perhaps I won't comment on that.
Okay. Well, let me ask, anybody else? Yeah, lady right at the top. Sorry, a graduate program. Yeah. Yeah. Well, actually, yes, I have given thought to it. The one that I was involved with was run in the UK, and it was run out of the University of Nottingham. It was a consortium of universities who got together and recruited, I think they had 30 people in their cohort. And they did a couple of modules of the then LH Martin program, ELAMP, Emerging Leaders and Managers program, and also they were on placement. They had four placements, and then those placements were within their own institution and outside their own institution. So at the end of that time, they graduated, they came out with an understanding of the higher education system, of working not just in one university, but in another university, and doing a range of different tasks. That sort of fell over mainly because of geography. It was very expensive, because if you sent somebody from London to Aberdeen for 3 months, you had to pay them a living allowance, and I think universities just walked away from it. It was just too expensive. However, I believe that a very similar program could be done if we had the training modules like ELAM, but could be done in each state, really. You could easily one in Sydney, one in Melbourne, one in Perth. There are sufficient universities to do that, and to get a really good cohort that can then go on and move through their higher education careers, knowing each other, having contacts, etc., etc. And it's expensive, but it's not not terribly expensive, not like the UK one was. And I've written it up. I wrote it up. I actually have it written down. I think we're done. We're done. Look, Liz, I've been following you for years and years and years, and we've never met. And so it's an opportunity for me to say, I've always admired you. I've admired the work you've done. I've admired the diligence and the professionalism of what you publish. And I've admired how important it is. These sorts of events are very, very challenging for someone like me, because it brings to me, it's easy for me to wave my hands around in print and say this is all nonsense and you've all got to fix this and pull yourselves together. But in fact, it's really, really hard. And Liz, you demonstrate how it is really, really hard, and yet change is possible. And people just have to persevere as you have. Being really smart also helps. Liz Baré, thank you very much.
Could I, thank you very much, Stephen. I should also acknowledge my colleague Janet Beard here, who's been jointly working with me in all these projects.